So Al first, Galveston-born civil rights attorney with a career spanning education, equity, and voting rights. He, as I said, went to MIT and taught in desegregated schools before pursuing law at the University of Texas, luckily for us, where he became an advocate for diversity, even while he was at UT. When he looked around and noticed there was only there were 3 other Mexicanos, I think, in the class at the time of 500 students, and there was only 1 African American at the time. He is renowned for landmark cases like Edgewood versus Kirby, LULAC lawsuits against the state of Texas, Richards, and he influenced Texas higher education law, legislative reforms, including the top 10% rule that Linda knows well from Ibarranquel's battles. Norma Cantu, also renowned in her own world, is a Brownsville native, Harvard Law alumni, as I said, at 22, a Maldiv attorney for 14 years, former assistant secretary for civil rights under Clinton and Secretary Riley. She directed landmark policy while she was at the Department of Ed, and I believe was the longest serving assistant secretary in that role, and she had like a team of 500 people that she would send out throughout the country to make sure they were abiding by disability laws for the elderly, for example, and for children with special needs. Then she left and came back as an attorney and went to teach at UT Law, where she spent, I believe, 22 years also as a professor. I mean, who would have thought when we were growing up in Brownsville, Texas, that she would go to Harvard, imagine, that she would then become a defender of the world in Maldiv, and she would go and teach at the university that we'd only hoped of getting into ourselves. So taught in the College of Education here at UT and at the School of Law, and started many new courses, especially with regards to special needs children, disabled, and other students who had not been represented well. She continues, now she has just recently retired from UT, and she continues to champion civil rights as Small Deaf Board Chair. And one thing I didn't mention earlier was she was appointed as to the Civil Rights Commission and became the first Latina to chair the Civil Rights Commission. So I'm leaving many things out. Both have been honored by many, many organizations, and if you take a moment and look at their full information online, you will be greatly impressed. Noreen Rivera comes in as the baby of the group because she is a young professor as associate professor at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. She specializes in 19th century U.S.-Mexico border literature and culture. She was not in the university at the time that we were doing the work that we're going to be talking about today. She came then the next generation, and we thought it would be really important to see what the next generation is doing with the resources that were as a result of the pleitos in the law, in the courts of law, and with the money that was given to South Texas and border universities with the South Texas Border Initiative. So in higher education, when I was a baby president, and I was 37, and then I became president, that was at the community college, and then 5 years later we started UT Brownsville in partnership with Texas Southwest College. And so I was a baby UT president too. And it was a strange thing because every time I walked up to the door, the guard had to look at the paper and make sure that I was a legitimate president. And he didn't try to be very careful, but he'd kind of look under the desk and he'd look at my name and he'd say, oh, okay, you're in. So we were never quite easily admitted wherever we went. All of you know this very, very well. But once you're at the table, then you're there and you speak and you make your demands as necessary and to play the role that you think is important for the moment. There was a moment when there was a lawsuit that was going to be filed in the state of Texas. And I'm going to have Al and Norma now take us through the particulars of that lawsuit and why that became important to the work that we eventually have done in South Texas. I have a new publication that'll be out soon and it's called Lighting the Fuse. And I use that title because I think it explains what they did. They lit the fuse that started now a large amount of information and court issues that brought up the issues that we will discuss today. Had they not lit that fuse, today we would not be enjoying, I believe, what we do in the South Texas and border community. So Al, you're going to start then, if you don't mind.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Norma is going to start, the music, and then
Okay.
light fuse.
And I'm going to point at this man, Dr. Chayin, right here. That's how it started. I'm going to point at Dr. Jaime Chayin, because that's the person who convinced me we were going to do this. So stand up. The way Al and I split this up, start my timer, go, okay. The way we split this up is I'm going to talk about how we set up the lawsuit, what happened before Latinos thought it was a great idea to sue everybody that they needed to keep as a friend. And then Al will proceed to describe both the kind of evidence that was brilliantly put together by Al, but also the results. And then you all can ask us the tough questions after that. Play Stump the Professors. Okay, no prizes will be given. Okay, let's start. The players. Good job. The players here were just about everyone you can think about. If you had to write a script for a movie, think casts of thousands. All right, literally. The two lead groups of lawyers were MALDEF and the Texas Rural Legal Aid. And I'm going to put emphasis on the word rural because the border area back then when we filed was the largest city was San Antonio, and we had clients who of all colors in that group. It was predominantly Hispanic.
What year was that?
83, 87, give me a guess.
87.
87, okay. The Reynaldo Garza School of Law was a fantastic social experiment. They had gotten somehow miraculously permission from the state bar to tentatively open up a law school. And the players, the two lawyers cast there are Yolanda Garza and Denora Diaz. Two Latinas, by the way, were advocating for the school to become more than just an idea, but become a reality and receive funding. Every Hispanic organization that had more than 10 members wanted to be a client, and Al was able to sign them all up. But because we had to get standing to sue, you have to demonstrate a real injury. You can't just say speculatively, there's something wrong with higher ed, and we're just going to go to court and sort it out. So we had to add not just organizations that had put their blood, sweat, and tears into gaining opportunity to get access to higher ed, but individual people, brave folk, signed up to talk about their stories and how they had been discriminated against. When young men at A&M would repeatedly get beat up just because he was a young Latino man at A&M. The district judge, key player, totally very competent and wonderful. And the witnesses, again, thanks to every professor, every head of a chamber of commerce, every elected official who knew that we had been treated differently in the border area of Texas. The defense counsel were led by a Latino who did a competent job, and we couldn't believe that he put all his efforts and all his talent to trying to hold us back, but he did. And then the universities, we sued the entire state of Texas. It was us against them. It was the students, the families, the communities in the border area not understanding and not being able to make any sense at all of why there was more funding and it was so much closer in the rest of the state. And finally, the stakeholders who didn't testify. These are people who were our allies and were very, very supportive. Finally, the media, including Dr. Rivas Rodriguez, who was Al, you remember she was there? Yeah, she was there for the trial, and she was an active journalist covering the trial. Those are the players, okay. So what's at stake? There were more than the 3 questions, but I'll just summarize. Whether the Texas Supreme Court would uphold and expand the legal foundation for these public school finance case, Edgewood, and use a similar type of legal analysis. The second is whether the geographic discrimination violated Texas equal protection. And thirdly, whether the allocation of funds was irrational and illegal. So I'm not going to give you spoilers, I'm not going to tell you how it came out. Dr. Olivas, Michael Olivas, who passed away recently, an eminent lawyer and scholar, was of the opinion that there were other cases that people should be aware of that are part of our portfolio of rights as Hispanics, Mexican Americans. Rodriguez versus San Antonio, Filer versus Doe, the Edgewood case, and also a higher ed case called Fordyce, where the stated integration decided, hey, it takes money to integrate higher ed, let's close down the black universities. Where in that case, Clarence Thomas said, you are not going to do that. So he was called a silent member of the Supreme Court. In higher education, we actually heard his voice saying, no, you do not cause harm to a third party who is part of the solution, not part of the problem. But for irrationality, that topic, Dr. Olivas wrote a wonderful paper on it where he compared our Texas higher education statutes to what an architect would be doing if this architect never scrapped their prior work, but in fact kept amending the blueprints by adding more rooms until you end up to a situation where you've got a shower in your living room. That's what the higher education system looked like in Texas. You would ask for money, the money would come in, you would spend the money without really planning for the future, and it was so chaotic that Latinos could not break through that chaos. What Dr. Olivas said, in the court case that he was reviewing that had nothing to do with Texas, he said it was probably right for the court to stay out of trying to make sense of that patchwork of legislation. But in Texas, the fact that we kept meeting over and over again as a Texas legislature and kept amending those higher ed laws, it made no sense. There was no connection at all to our state goals and to our state needs. And the resolution, what finally came out of Texas, was to address that irrationality, that chaos, that shower in the living room. The extensive work before filing was huge, and you can ask me questions about that, but I'm going to just mention one case that happened that was part of the background. Texas was not the only state with issues of disparities and discrimination in higher ed. At the time we filed, there were 6 other states that had been sued by the federal government, and Judge Pratt had in front of him what was left of a lawsuit where the U.S. Department of Education refused to do its job. And he told them, I'm going to just give you deadlines. I'm not going to tell you what to do as a federal agency, but when you do nothing at all, then the third branch of government comes in and the judges hold you accountable to do your work. Texas was put under a deadline. Texas collected data, sent it to the feds. Texas actually was forced by the feds to go into a settlement to collect data and to address disparities for blacks and Latinos. They put, in the 5-year plan, Texas kept sending reports for 4th year. They didn't send the 5th year. They said, we're not going to finish this work. We started collecting data, but we think we're done. That's all we want to do. And that's my time. I'm going to leave you on that cliffhanger.
Thank you very much. Every time I hear about people's backgrounds, I compare it to my own. Mine was exactly the opposite. My great uncles graduated from UT Law School in 1916 and 1918. My father began going to UT Austin in 1924. He lived in a little flop house right here on Speedway, probably just about where we are right now. So my aunts all went to UT. I went to UT Law. My sister got a nursing degree. My brother got a master's. So we got UT family all the way back. And that is the way most Anglo families in Texas were, especially if you had any educators in your family. So a little comparison there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the facts of the case, how we developed the plan. If we put up the first little slide, I have what I call the border area. So when we got into this case, remember, we had just done the Edgewood case, so we knew something about the history of discrimination in Texas against Latinos. And we said, it also applies to higher education. So let's look at how that works. So the first thing we did is, what area did it discriminate against? Because we got all these complaints from Brownsville and Corpus and Kingsville and every city basically along the border about lack of higher education opportunities. So we decided to look at that. We said, what area of the state was always labeled the Mexican part of the state? And of course, that's the border area. So we came up with this area of 41 counties. It had 20% of the state's population. It had only 10% of the state's money for higher education. And we basically had nothing. I mean, great educators here. I consult the educators here. But you had no doctoral programs. You had very few master's programs. You had no professional programs except medical school in San Antonio. The disparities were just incredible. So I'm just going to talk about two facts that some people might not know. One is that the Higher Education Coordinating Board, a friend who used to work there after this happened, they had a policy saying you couldn't get a PhD program unless you had more than one. So that was because Texas A&I Kingsville had one, and UTEP had one. So you had to have more than one to get more. So a whole lot of Florida, we had 2 PhD programs, and there were 600 in the rest of the state. Commerce had 50 or 60 PhD programs. Denton had 3 universities and had 100 PhD programs. Everybody had PhD programs except the border. If you wanted to get a PhD in Spanish, you could go to Commerce, or you could go to Denton. You could even go to Lubbock, but you couldn't go anywhere along the border. All those universities where you can see Mexico, you couldn't get a Spanish PhD. So just a few of the facts, I guess, that most concern me. So let's go on to the next chart. So what we did in the case, went to court, we won. We had a 7-week trial in Brownsville. We had a jury mainly of Brownsville people. They understood what was going on. The jury found for us, the judge found for us, and we were just flying high. This is in 1992. Now, we had done the Edgewood case, so we knew that just because you have a court order doesn't mean anything. You need to get the legislature to do something. So this time, we decided to do that first. We worked with Brian Ganson, TRLA, and Norma and I formed a coalition of groups from all over the border area. We had a group in North San Antonio, South San Antonio, Corpus, Kingsville, Laredo, Brownsville, Edinburgh, Laredo, Alpine was also part of the university, and El Paso. Got all these people together with a lot of legislators also in the group, and we created the South Texas Border Plan. By the way, Norma already pointed out to Jaime Chain. I'll tell you, other people who helped us on this was a guy named Eddie Cavazos. I see it. Eddie Cavazos. Eddie Cavazos. Alex Moreno also helped us. Alex Moreno. Come on, Alex. Other people who work with Emma Rangel, in Paz Descanse. Judith Zaffarini, Carlos Truan, in Paz Descanse again. Gonzalo Barrientos, even though he wasn't from the border, he helped us. So these were folks who worked very hard. Jaime Chang was our first witness. He was pretty shocked when we told him that, but he had to explain the whole history of higher education in Texas. So we won the case. Go back, sorry. What I tried to do, because now I'm an academic and I don't have to work, I just have to research. I decided to write an article. So I wrote an article on the improvements in higher education in the border. And this chart does that. So if you see over 1992, the border area had about 10 or 11% of all the state funds. We get to 2012, and we have about 18%. It's the greatest increase of any area of the United States in higher education in history, as far as I know. 880 million. 880 million. So the next chart, you want to get the next one, is the improvements. So in the border, in 1993, we filed the case. There's a total budget of $166 billion in the universities. And that included UTSA, all the border universities along Corpus to Kingsville to Laredo, the Valley schools, UTEP, all of them had that total. So we went up in 20 years to 508 million. So here's the percentage increases. The border went up 206%. The state went up 100% during that time. But not only did we go up in money, we went up in students. But the incredible impact of the case was to increase opportunities all the way across the board. Now, we talked about PhD programs a lot, and a lot of money went to that. But a lot of money also went to scholarship programs, new centers, things that the border needed for a long time. And again, this was actually an organic system. It came from the universities themselves on what they needed. We pulled all that together into the plan. I learned a little politics along the way. People like Eddie would tell me this, try to teach me this stuff. We went to see Lieutenant Governor Bullock, presented our plan to him. We went to see the two candidates for speaker. I will say this was different. When I presented my school finance plan to Bullock, he said, "Al, this is the biggest pile of shit I've ever seen." And I said, "Well, but you can do it." He said, "Oh, you're such great lawyers, I know you can do it." He smiled at me and said, "You like people to blow smoke at you, Al?" I said, "You're blowing smoke out of my ass so much it's coming out my ears." So that's the history of higher education in Texas. That's how things happen. So let's look at the individual universities. You can look at these. I talked about some of the individual institutions, UTSA, UTEP, TAMU. I teach at St. Mary's Law School. We have 55% Latino students. 30% of our students are Latina. So if y'all want to give up on this little institution, go to a good institution, right? We want more Latino law students. So I tell them about this case, and they say, "You worked on higher education?" I said, "Yeah, way before you were born." But people went to TAMU. TAMU was actually just a higher education institution. And the border, that was one of the ways they sort of treated us sort of as foster children, as sort of people you didn't want in the family. They gave us higher education institutions. So Corpus Christi was not a four-year university; it was a junior and senior school, upper division school, and so was Brownsville, and so was Laredo. There were these upper division schools, so the lower level people, freshmen and sophomores, couldn't go to a real university. And although people like Julieta did their best, it was still hard to transfer back and forth. So these universities were not real universities. That's one way they played with us. Now, to get the plan together, I told you we had meetings. We printed the plan, presented it, and then we got to the legislature. And I will say that the legislators were very active and very helpful. And again, Judith Ceferini, Irma Rangel, Alex, and Eddie came up with plans. And we basically wrote the South Texas Border Initiative, which promised us $450 million the first few years and long-term funding for new buildings, for new programs, and it basically created the genesis, the seed money for a lot of additional programs. So we feel good about the overall improvements in the plan. So one more thing I covered, this might be a little hard to read, is what I call the tiers. When we did our case, we said there are 5 tiers of education, higher education in Texas. There's tier 1, UT and A&M, we ain't got those. There's tier 2, which is Texas Tech, University of Houston, we don't got those. Tier 3, University of North Texas, Texas Women's University, UT Arlington, UT Dallas, we don't have any of those. We're all 4th and 5th tiers. But after this was over, the universities worked so hard that they actually got promotions. So the next chart, in 2015, we actually had moved up, where we had tier 2 universities out of 5, we had tier 3 universities, and we're just about to get up to tier 1, which is multiple doctoral programs, large amounts of research facilities, etc. Now, why does it matter? It matters because, first of all, you're giving opportunities to your students. We did this case. The people in Brownsville wanted a PhD. They had to go to Houston to get it. They had this one brave professor who would fly down from Houston to Brownsville once every week and give them classes. So that's, again, stepchildren is how we treat them. So you want programs, you can get them right in your community. A very, very important improvement. Also, for public schools, it helps because the public school people can go get masters or PhDs at the university across the street or down the road instead of having to go to Austin or College Station. So the long-term effects have been very positive. I said Laredo now has a 4-year university with graduate programs. I think they have a PhD program at what they call TAMU. Brownsville is now combined with Edinburgh. Julieta is going to pull together a book about that. I think there's going to be several books about how they got that, combined with a medical school, very important. Corpus Christi got to 4 years, a large number of doctoral programs. And UTSA downtown was just a vision in the head of Gregory Luna. He said, we went around, I was in a meeting with Bullock, Bob Bullock and senators from all the border area, and we went around. This is the way Bullock, I told you about the smoke. That's another Bob Bullock story. This was a little bit cleaner. He went around and he said, "What do you want?" And Judith Seffer, he said, "I want a four-year university program." Okay. "What do you want?" You said, "I want more graduate programs, professional programs." "What do you want?" And Truan said, "Well, I want a pharmacy school in Kingsville because Irma will kill me if we don't have it. And then I want Corpus Christi to have four-year university." And what's your graduate? "What do you want?" "I want a downtown campus." Por eso, that's why we have UTSA downtown. So all these things come out, the lawsuits are helpful, so thank you all very much.
I thought that one of the things that impressed me the most about the case, there's so many details that we're not able to cover today. But one of them had to do with alliteration, and English majors appreciate alliteration. And that was the argument that you all made, that I think Norma invented, and that was dollars, degrees, and distance. And so they made the argument based on too little dollars for too many Hispanics, too little degrees as compared to other parts of the state, and too far distance to go to. And so when you think of the cases like that, you think of how they were able to make an argument so cogently and purposefully. The three illiterate kind of words that I think are very important to us are dollars, distance, and number of degrees. So what had happened then was that when Edgewood was fought by MALDEF against the state of Texas and won, Edgewood was about K through 12, and the state of Texas was sued successfully, and they were at the Supreme Court level, then obliged to change the funding system for K through 12. So then MALDEF attorneys said, well, if it worked for K through 12, maybe it'll work for higher ed. So what you've just heard is an explanation of that application. And am I right in saying it that way? So they said, well, let's try doing the same thing we did with K through 12.
Mexican Americanist. I served as a member of the principal organization in English Literary Studies, the MLA, the Executive Committee of Race and Ethnicity for 2021 to 2023. I was also selected as a participant in the 2022 NEH Summer Faculty Institute Transnational Dialogues in Afro-Latino and Afro-Latinx Studies, which is held at the University of Pittsburgh. And I'm also the coordinator, and this is how I know Maggie Rivas, who I'm going to praise as a part of my presentation, the coordinator for UTRGV's Voices of a Pandemic digital archive, where through my learning and the mentorship that Maggie gave me, I was able to pass that knowledge on through the resources of UT Austin. And my students and I helped create a robust archive of over 100 oral histories that contributed to Maggie's Voices of a Pandemic, as well as to UTRGV's archive también. And it's a bilingual archive, because even though, yes, I am an English professor, I allow for my students to speak to their family members in Spanish and conduct those archives in Spanish. So it's a beautiful archive, and I'm hoping I can have resources to further develop it. Latest publications, University of Massachusetts and Cornell University Press is where I've published as of late. So before I deliver my remarks, I know I'm the youngest person here, but I am in your shadows and I'm continuing your work in South Texas. And so to offer some background on the subject of my presentation up here, I'd like to share 3 points about myself and my experiences as an educator in higher ed that have motivated me to provide students in the Rio Grande Valley with learning opportunities that continue to help bridge the distance to course offerings, instructor access, and resources for research, as well as to sites of power. So, like Julieta and Norma, I have roots in Brownsville. My great-great-grandfather was born there in 1865, just after the Civil War. Subsequent generations established roots in the Mid-Valley, LaFerrier, Mercedes, Westlaco, which is my hometown. And beginning in the 1960s, the institution in Edinburgh that was known as Pan American College, then Pan American University, and later UTPA, empowered 9 of my family members, extended and immediate, including myself, as we earned our degrees, and each of us took on different roles in public education. So I have a family who is serving as superintendents, secondary school teachers, elementary school teachers, counselors, and then myself as the sole associate professor. Hence, coming from this family of educators, I view my career as equally one that fulfills a family vocation in the Rio Grande Valley, as well as my role as professor as being a steward of caring for Rio Grande students' needs across the region. Secondly, While STBI did not create a bachelor's and master's degree that I pursued in English in the legacy institution of UTPA in the early 2000s, I still consider myself, like Al and Norman was saying, one of the many South Texas students in the early aughts, 2000s, right? And we had to talk about the powerhouse of the 1990s for creating resources, libraries, new hires. That impacted me in 2000 to 2003 as I had access. The year that I entered in 2000, and I read your piece out, that 80-page document, I was amazed to see that Al had published in that for the first time in the fall of 2000, the state had spent an equitable amount on students pursuing higher education in the border area in comparison to students from other parts of the state. So I'm a beneficiary in that sense for sure. No doctoral degree in English yet, so I had to go upriver, as I say, to the University of Texas, New Mexico, where I learned my profession, my field in American Literary Studies. So on to the issue of distance. When I started at UTRGV in 2014 as a tenure track professor, I didn't need to bridge distance between myself and my students as their instructor. Distance and remote teaching were not issues as I later experienced on the Brownsville campus, and especially during the COVID pandemic years. My first 2 years, I taught classes in person across all levels, freshmen, upper division, graduate students. However, by 2016, I noticed, and other faculty noticed, on the Brownsville campus that there was a decline in student population, and especially in the English program, where my department is one of 3 branches that contribute to that major. Some classes that students needed to graduate were only offered on the Edinburgh campus. Also, some courses in my department on the Brownsville campus were not scheduled in time for students to register. So resultantly, student population shifted. Upper division classes in my department in Brownsville were no longer regularly making minimum enrollment numbers set by the state. So to continue teaching and taking classes in person on the Brownsville campus, professors and students were offered distance learning options in the form of ITV, or interactive television. This type of teaching technology meant that I and other professors using this modality would instruct one group of students in person at one campus, while the second group of students sitting in a classroom on the other campus watched the lesson live on TV. I soon realized that I needed to practice new methods of teaching in order, aside from being the Socratic sage on the stage, in order to engage both bodies of students actively. So to offer a special learning experience in my Mexican-American literature course in particular, I partnered with a colleague who taught Latino literature at the University of Marymount in Arlington, Virginia. And together we organized a study away, where she would bring her students to the borderlands of South Texas, and I was gonna take my students to Washington, DC and the DMV to get exposed to that awesome side of power, since so often students in the Rio Grande Valley feel that they are on the margins, the frontera of the nation state. However, the COVID-19 pandemic shut it down. We were scheduled to go in March 2020, right? When everything happened. So my colleague and I, we continued to engage our students through pen pal exchanges and so forth. But it was the Digital Humanities Oral History Partnership that I entered with Maggie Rivas Rodriguez in the summer of 2020, which we continued for nearly 2 years after, that I celebrate particularly today for the ways in which it's helped me bridge the distance UTRGV students experienced in their remote asynchronous classes during COVID. After receiving administrative approval at UTRGV in July 2020, I took on the role of UTRGV Voces of a Pandemic Coordinator, and my institution became, you can switch the slide, thank you. My institution became one of many institutions listed here that Maggie had reached out and partnered with. It was a beautiful partnership, including in the territory of Puerto Rico. But the beauty of it was that my students were a part of all these R1 institutions across the nation state. And they felt that sense of belonging. Maggie allowing us to have these resources to help students do something meaningful in times of remote distance learning and build an archive, as I said, of almost 100 oral history projects. So, Voces partners were offered generous digital resources, help from production managers on Maggie's team, some of which I see here in the audience. In addition, they learned valuable skill sets. I view this organization as a democratic structure of reciprocity that allowed me as both a researcher and an educator the ability to coordinate for my students meaningful asynchronous education and teaching a variety of skill sets, such as hosting Zoom meetings, using Dropboxes for uploading files. The Voces partnership also enabled me to teach students communication skills that are invaluable assets of the 21st century, as well as teaching them basic literacy and journalistic type inquisitiveness, like creating open-ended and closed-ended questions to solicit storytelling and drafting complex interview scripts. And you can go ahead and fast forward to that a little bit more. Oh, we can leave it here actually. Okay. So it was a very valuable archive, and it was an important one because nearly 1/3 of the Rio Grande Valley's estimated 1.4 million people live below the poverty line, and COVID-19 deeply impacted us. So under these historic conditions between fall 2020 and spring 2022, I integrated the Voices of a Pandemic Oral History project into my asynchronous course. And the result was a sizable, and you can go ahead and skip to the second to the last slide. One more. Go back. There we go. One more, please. Thank you. Sizable, 100 plus oral histories in total. We have a beautiful bilingual archive where educators, healthcare professionals, clergy from San Juan Basilica, even attorneys, small business owners, the students exceeded my expectations because that's the power and potential in South Texas when we're given the resources and we're able to bridge the distance that still lingers because of the growing pains of the merge. But to conclude, in my opinion, present circumstances at UTRGV are moving in a very positive direction as the pandemic years further recede in the rearview mirror. There's a concerted drive to make UTRGV an R1 institution, and my hope is that the leadership will establish an R1 culture in all of its campuses, with equitable in-person access to research-driven professors such as myself, programs and scholarly events, which do not require masses of undergraduate students to commute 4 hours or more round trip to complete their degrees at another campus. I want to acknowledge my interim dean, Jose Davila, and my new department chair, Dr. Barbara Zimblist, who are both attuned to the needs of students in the Lower Valley. My new chair, who we recruited from UTEP, so she understands a thing or two about border R1s and the necessities that students need and faculty. She plans to teach on the Bronzeville campus this spring, which is an effort that is unique unto her leadership. And with these positive changes, I too look forward to returning in person to teach in the Brownsville campus. I haven't taught Mexican American literature at the Brownsville campus the spring of 2020. So I'm excited at the prospect of educating students in person about literary studies and digital skills, like those that I taught under the mentorship of Maggie Rivas for the Voces of a Pandemic Oral History Project, as well as other computational methods that I know, which can help UTRGV students in the humanities develop their communication skills and digital literacy in the 21st century so they can be more competitive in today's job market. Thank you.
So alive and well and growing and improving. We have just, thank you so much, Dr. We have, so the work's not done, the work's begun, and we were able to move it a few inches forward, and now it's moving yet again. And it's wonderful and very enlightening and very helpful to all of us to hear of your success and your seriousness and your conscientious manner of approaching your work. Thank you, thank you. So we have just a couple of minutes left before we have to go to the next session. We actually have, I think, 30 minutes between this session and the next session, if I'm right. But we'd like to take maybe 5 minutes of that before your break to offer up any questions you might have for the audience. Yes, ma'am.
How do you suggest we prepare for the because I have a feeling that it's going to be.
You've got a legislator sitting right in front of you. She's basically going to be speaker, I hope. We will floor us the right, but all I can say is the same thing I would always say, which is meet with your legislators early, tell them what you want, organize with other people in other communities, work with both parties, and be consistent. Those are the only things I would say.
Let me add one thing, because we were talking about Yvette Ancam a moment ago. When Yvette first approached the top 5% rule, she thought she was going to be aiming only at the Hispanic population, maybe the Black population in Texas. What she discovered after a while was that she was also gaining strength from the rural population. because they were disadvantaged by not having the 5% rule. So new coalitions are also very, very important to build. Sometimes not the obvious ones that you begin to think about. Good question. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Sir. Yes, ma'am.
I have one. In the early days of the lawsuit, could you describe what the opposition argument and attitude was, and whether there was any personal intimidation or attacks and that sort of thing?
Okay, so I'm from Brownsville and I'm tough and I could take verbal easily. The problem is they tried to shame us in terms of saying you just aren't ready. You don't deserve it. You're not gonna use your skills appropriately. I mean, all these stereotypes, were playing in. When I was co-counsel with Al, I felt confident. I felt able to represent my case well. But when it's one-on-one with these attorneys, it was more of weird. They felt the state was going to win. They were really surprised that the jury came out with a ruling for us. The other thing is, I was surprised the Supreme Court deliberated for a whole year. Okay, you don't know. The Texas Supreme Court doesn't have to tell you why they're stalling, what's going on, what could happen next. But what I believe is happening is, if someone is opposing your position, you don't roll over, you don't give up on yourself, you don't give up on the folk that you care about, and you try as hard as you can to secure the widest protection and the widest services you can for people you love. And keep in mind what motivates me. People vastly overestimate how much harm I can produce. Vastly. I mean, I have sent police officers away from me who pulled me over, and then when I said why, they look at me like, I don't know. Okay? And I've had a state trooper apologize to me because he took too long to come to my car. When somebody rear-ended me and I waited and waited and waited and I called again, he actually apologized. Okay, so my folks raised me that way. And we all need to act like who we are as Mexican Americans. We are the majority. We need to act that way, expect it that way, and we need to have people be accountable to us. Not because we're going to hurt them, we're going to be better leaders than white folk have been. And we're going to treat everyone as if, we were elected to serve all Texans. If you want to listen to a video better than what I just said, go to the Maldiv YouTube and listen to the head of Maldiv, the president, Thomas Sainz. His 2 points that I walked away from his talk that he gave last week is we can lead this country to a better economy because we as Mexican Americans know how to do a lot with a little. What you just heard today was us doing a lot with a little. And his second point was people make better choices when they're better educated. So if you want our country not to waste money, if you want taxes to go down, if you want programs to be better, then educate everybody, and that includes higher education.
I just want to clarify one thing. We lost at the Texas Supreme Court. We won at the district court. The Texas Supreme Court found against us. Norma and I argued it. But they waited a year, she said. But during that year, Texas passed the plan. So between the time the court heard the argument in November of '92 and the time the court decided it in October of '93, the South Texas Board has been passed. And we made a footnote. In the Supreme Court, I feel proud about the footnote. In the Supreme Court opinion, they said, well, we know that Texas likes the border area. Their good faith has been shown by the passage of the South Texas Border Initiative, where they sent $450 million to So I've heard through second and third hand hearsay that there was some communication going on between the leadership and the Texas Supreme Court. Second, third, maybe fourth hand, but I believe it. Okay.
Let me add, back to Maggie Rivas, back to Voces, back to what Noreen is doing. The coverage by press and scholars of what we need in terms of higher education equity, and I hate the word equity, okay, access, we'll use another word. That coverage makes people aware that this is something we're watching and something that we absolutely need in this state. That we need to have all Texans be able to reach their full potential. One piece, one article that Deborah Santiago wrote for the Excelencia in Education got 250 citations from other scholars. So one person like Maureen can influence a whole lot, just like one person in this room can influence, you know, what Texas is going to do in the legislature, and that's how you can help your electeds. The Voces Project has been documenting and recording what Mexican Americans have been doing with making Texas the strong place that it is. But remember when I told you that the Texas legislatures told DOJ, we're done, we finished, we're going to quit early, want to buy? They can't stop collecting data that we need. We need to fight for having reports come out. The legislators need to keep insisting that they be informed. Well, how many Mexican Americans graduated? Did they graduate on time? What kind of jobs did they get? What are you going to do differently? Those kinds of reports went away when President Reagan said, hey, I don't believe in race and we're not going to collect any race-based data. We need to fight for our data and not lose it, because those are the tools that we use to prove that the gap has not closed.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a comment about the legislature.
Introduce yourself, please.
I'm sorry. I'm Lily Flores, state representative here in Travis County. I am a Democrat. I will say that in South Texas, we got a lot of new Republican colleagues coming over. So I would encourage each and every one of you to prevail upon those Latino and Latina representatives from that area to make sure that they work alongside us, who have always been, pushing for equity and programming. So they need to understand that their gente needs this education so that they can make sure that they hit upon the leadership that is prevailing at both the House and the Senate and the governor's office, to make sure that their voices are heard and that the needs are amplified through them as well. We're going to do our part, but we need those members to also hear from their constituents to make sure that we get what we need and we can form those coalitions.
Thank you for your service, really appreciate it. Let me just mention that there's nothing wrong with the human capital on the border and in South Texas that a little bit of opportunity can't solve. We have kids winning national chess tournaments. UTRGV's chess team has won the national chess tournament for the last 4 years in a row, beating Harvard, beating Yale, beating probably MIT also. They have wiped them out. We now have a PhD in physics. They laughed when I talked about a bachelor's degree in physics. We now are beginning a PhD in physics. Nothing wrong with the human capital on South Texas and the border that a little bit of opportunity can't solve. Thank you so much for your participation today.